She owns 3 apartment buildings in Rome. She manages the accounts herself. She negotiates with tenants, oversees repairs, handles disputes. She has a lawyer she trusts and a banker she doesn't entirely. Her late husband left her everything, and she has grown it considerably since. She is also, according to Roman law, a second-class citizen who cannot vote, cannot hold political office, and until recently could not conduct legal business without a male guardian signing off on her behalf. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and the tension between them is the whole story. This is a video about Roman women, not the famous ones, not Cleopatra, not Livia, not the empresses you've heard of. The ordinary ones. The businesswomen, the mothers, the wives, the enslaved women, the women who managed estates and wrote letters and ran small empires of their own within the larger empire that officially didn't see them. The story of Roman women is one of the most contradictory, most surprising, and most revealing stories in all of ancient history. Because Rome gave women almost no formal power, and some Roman women accumulated extraordinary amounts of it anyway. Stay with me, and subscribe if you haven't. This channel tells the full story of Rome, not just the half with the legions and the emperors. Let's start with the legal framework, because you can't understand Roman women's lives without understanding what the law said about them, and how different that was from what actually happened. Roman law organized society around a concept called patria potestas, the power of the father. The male head of a Roman household, the paterfamilias, had legal authority over everyone in it: his wife, his children, his grandchildren, his slaves. In the early republic, this authority was nearly absolute. A paterfamilias could legally sell his children into slavery, arrange their marriages without consent, and in the most extreme theoretical cases, exercise the power of life and death over his household. Women existed within this system in a specific way. An unmarried woman was under the authority of her father. A married woman was, depending on the form of marriage, under the authority of either her husband or still her father. In either case, she was legally subordinate to a male guardian. The guardian, the tutor, was required to authorize significant legal acts on a woman's behalf: selling property, making a will, entering certain contracts. Without the tutor's authorization, these acts were legally void. This sounds like complete legal incapacity, and in the early republic, it largely was. But Roman law evolved, and by the imperial period, the era of Augustus and his successors, the picture had changed considerably. The tutorship system had been progressively weakened. Tutors could be compelled by courts to give authorization they were unreasonably withholding. Women who had given birth to 3 or more children, or 4 if they were freed women, received the ius liberorum, the right of children, which exempted them entirely from needing a tutor for most legal purposes. Over time, the tutorship became increasingly formal, a rubber stamp rather than a real control mechanism. By the 2nd century AD, many wealthy Roman women were conducting business effectively on their own authority, managing property, entering contracts, engaging in litigation. The law still said they needed a tutor. In practice, the tutor often did whatever the woman wanted. The gap between legal theory and social reality in Roman women's lives is enormous and endlessly interesting. Let's talk about marriage, because a Roman woman's life was organized around it in ways that shaped everything else. As we discussed in the marriage video, Roman women could be betrothed in childhood and were legally marriageable at 12. Elite girls were often married in their mid-teens. The choice of husband was a family decision, dominated by the father, shaped by political and economic calculation. But, and this is important, Roman law did require a woman's consent to marriage, not robust, meaningful consent in the modern sense. But active, clear refusal could in theory block a marriage. This was not nothing. Once married, a woman's experience varied enormously depending on her husband, her class, and her own personality and intelligence. In a good marriage, a Roman wife was a genuine partner in the management of the household. The domus, the household, was her domain. She oversaw the slaves, managed the accounts, supervised the education of children, maintained social relationships on behalf of the family. This was not a trivial role. A Roman household was an economic and social unit of real complexity, and the woman who ran it wielded genuine influence over its success. In a bad marriage, the options were limited, but not non-existent. Divorce, as we've discussed, was available and used. A Roman woman who wanted to leave her marriage could leave it, provided she had family backing and somewhere to go. The ease of Roman divorce was, in a backhanded way, one of the more progressive features of Roman family law. What a woman could not do was control the financial consequences of divorce without careful prior arrangement. Her dowry, the property she brought to the marriage, was supposed to be returned on divorce. In practice, recovering it required litigation and family support. Now let's get specific. What did Roman women actually do with their days? The answer depends entirely on class. For wealthy women, the day began early. The Roman morning was early for everyone. Business and social life started at dawn or before. A wealthy Roman woman would receive visitors, manage correspondence, oversee household accounts. She might attend to religious duties. Roman women played significant roles in certain religious cults. She might visit friends, attend the baths, participate in the social life of her class. Education for wealthy women could be substantial. Roman society officially valued female education for the purpose of raising educated children. A mother who could not read could not supervise her children's education. But in practice, many upper-class women received serious intellectual formation. They read, they wrote, they engaged in literary and philosophical conversation. Some wrote. Sulpicia, a woman of the late 1st century BC, produced elegiac poetry that survives, the only works by a woman poet preserved from classical Rome. Her poems are direct, confident, and frankly erotic. She is clearly aware that female poets are unusual and seems not to care. For ordinary Roman women, the wives of craftsmen and tradespeople, the women of the working class, the picture was different. They worked. They worked in their husbands' businesses, serving customers in shops, helping in workshops, managing market stalls. They worked in other people's businesses, as midwives, as textile workers, as food sellers, as hairdressers. Women's labor was economically essential in ordinary Roman households and almost entirely invisible in Roman literary sources, which were written by and for the wealthy. Funerary inscriptions fill in some of the gap. A woman in Pompeii is commemorated as a negotiatrix frumentaria et pomaria, a grain and fruit merchant. Another is recorded as a medica, a physician. Another as a purpuraria, a dealer in purple cloth, one of the most expensive commodities in the Roman world. These women worked, specialized, succeeded, and were remembered by their families for it. Let's talk about the women who broke through in ways that Roman society officially said were impossible. Hortensia. In 42 BC, the triumvirs, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, were running short of money to fund their civil war and imposed a tax on the 1,400 wealthiest women in Rome. The women approached male advocates to argue against the tax on their behalf. The advocates refused to take the case. So Hortensia argued it herself. She entered the Forum, the center of Roman public and political life, a space where women were not supposed to speak in public, and delivered a speech before the triumvirs. A speech that Appian, the historian who records the episode, says was worthy of her father, the great orator Quintus Hortensius. She argued, in essence, that women should not be taxed to fund a war in which they had no political voice, no vote, no role in the decisions that made war necessary. "Why should we pay for your wars?" she asked, "when we have no part in your politics?" The triumvirs had her removed from the Forum. The next day, they reduced the tax to 400 women. She won. Partially. In the most male-dominated political space in the Roman world, with no legal standing to be there, with no male advocate willing to take her case, she walked in and changed the outcome. There is no statue of Hortensia in Rome. There probably should be. Let's talk about the women at the very top, because the history of the Roman Empire is, in a way that is rarely fully acknowledged, partly a history of women operating in the shadows of formal power. Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, mother of Tiberius, was one of the most powerful political actors in Rome for over 50 years. She had no formal office, she could hold no magistracy, command no army, sit in no senate. And yet her influence on Roman policy, on appointments, on the succession of power, was real and documented and feared. Augustus consulted her on major decisions. We know this because he wrote her letters, and she wrote back, and some of their content is preserved. Tiberius, after becoming emperor, eventually broke with her. Their relationship deteriorated into mutual hostility, but not before she had helped shape the early empire in ways that historians still argue about. Julia Domna, wife of the Emperor Septimius Severus in the late 2nd and early 3rd century, was an active intellectual and political figure. She gathered around her a salon of philosophers, scientists, and writers, including the famous physician Galen and the biographer Philostratus, who wrote the life of Apollonius at her commission. She traveled with her husband on campaign. She conducted diplomatic correspondence. She was, by any reasonable definition, a co-ruler in all but name. These women are not exceptions that prove a rule. They are examples of a broader pattern, that the formal exclusion of women from Roman public life created informal channels of influence that were, for the most capable women, genuinely effective. The ceiling was real. The cracks in it were also real. I want to end with someone whose name we don't know. In the collection of the Capitoline Museums in Rome, there is a funerary relief, a carved stone panel, showing a woman at work. She is seated. In front of her is what appears to be a counter. On the counter are small objects, possibly items for sale, possibly medical instruments. Scholars debate the precise interpretation. What is not in debate? This woman was commemorated at her death for her work. Whoever paid for this relief, her husband, her children, her business partner, wanted her remembered as a working person, a professional, a woman who did something in the world. Her name is gone. The inscription that would have named her has been lost or damaged. But the image of her remains, seated at her work, looking out at whoever is looking in. 2,000 years later, she existed, she worked. Someone loved her enough to put her in stone. That is not nothing, in any century. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep hearing these stories. The full story of Rome, not just the half that gets remembered. Leave a comment and tell me which Roman woman's story surprised you most. The next video is right there. See you there.